Future is exciting, ready, and Gassim, the nation builder. Tonight, the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources, Samuel Abujinapo, has issued a 7-day ultimatum to all persons and companies prospecting for gold in forest reserves to stop and remove the equipment. He has also directed the Minerals Commission with immediate effect not to accept or renew prospecting licenses in forest reserve. This is contained in a statement issued a while ago by the Minister. Manuel Kranting has a copy of that statement. He joins me in studio with details of it. Manuel, tell us more.
So the communique is titled Directive to Suspend Reconnaissance and or Prospecting Activities in All Forest Reserves Across the Country. And so it starts by saying, whereas the final communique of the National Consultative Dialogue on Small-Scale Mining held at the Accra International Conference Center on 14th and 15th April 2021 in paragraph 12, could emphatically charged government to take steps to put in place systems that would rigidly apply the law, noting particularly the sanctions or penalties imposed by Act 995 to all those who infringe the law, irrespective of political color or socio-economic status or class. Indeed, the better placed in society and who ought to know better should have the most punitive of the penalties applied to them, end quote. And so it continues also to say that whereas the Ministry of Land and Natural Resources has a mandate to ensure the sustainable management and utilization of the nation's lands, forests, and wildlife resources, the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources has taken note of the unfortunate and unlawful practice of some persons and or companies acquiring licenses under the pretext of undertaking reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves and yet proceed to...
So there's a directive also to persons and or companies engaged in this reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves. Tell us more about it, because it looks like it's affecting those with or without legal authorization. They are also supposed to suspend such activities until further notice.
So indeed, this seems to be an omnibus directive to all those who are participating in this particular sector. It says the Minister of Lands and Natural Resources hereby directs persons and or companies engaged in reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves with or without legal authorization to suspend such activities until further notice. Now, the minister has further directed the Minerals Commission of reconnaissance and prospecting licenses in the forest. And now it goes further to say that for the avoidance of doubt, and there's some emphasis being placed here, it says that except as directed by the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources in writing, all activities and operations in respect of any reconnaissance or prospecting licenses in forest reserves are hereby suspended until further notice. And it comes with a timeline, Emefa, which says that accordingly, the minister hereby gives persons and or companies engaged in reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves 7 days from the date of the publication of this notice to cease their operations and evacuate their equipment accordingly. The minister has served notice and on and requested
Minister for Lands and Natural Resources Samuel Abujinapo, and it's dated today, and this directive starts from 7 days. Also, the Minerals Commission has been immediately also directed not to accept or renew prospecting licenses in forest reserves. Well, we know we've been doing work on this particular issue. My colleague Erastus Asaridonko has been working on the Cobra Forest amongst others. We'll be getting to him shortly, as well as hear from the small-scale miners on this. But let's bring in the Deputy Minister Pulse a while ago.
People acquire license to prospect on a designated land or an area. Then they tend to use the prospecting license to mine. And that is the concern of the Minister, Honorable Samuel Abujinapo, and has directly and clearly, acquired the license for the purposes they sought to, use the license for. But unfortunately, these or some of these concessionaires acquire the license to do otherwise. And that is why they put a ban on any prospecting license in our respective forests. And this is, in a way, going to allow him and his outfit to regularize the sector in terms of acquisition of prospecting licenses.
How long do we expect to see this ban in place?
Depending on how we comply with the kind of advice put out there. If we comply and we get all the database, available, we'll do the regularization and get the trainings running. And we know the interest of the government is to get mining done responsibly, and that is what we can do. So he's seeking to get the sector well regularized.
So you heard the Deputy Minister Designate for Lands and Natural Resources, George Mrikuduka, earlier on the post once that statement was issued. So that's the directive now from the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources. And we get in details shortly from the Minister Designate for Lands and Natural Resources, George Mrikuduka, shortly on this. But my colleague, Erastus Asari-Donko, like I said, has been doing some extensive work on this particular issue in terms of activities in our forest reserve. So the minister in that statement mentions that whereas the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources has a mandate to ensure the sustainable management and utilization of the nation's lands, forests and wildlife resources, as well as the efficient management of the mineral resources for socio-economic growth and development. And also whereas the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources has taken note of the unfortunate and unlawful practice of some persons and or companies acquiring licenses under the pretext of undertaking reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves, and yet proceed to engage in illegal mining in such forest reserves with its obvious adverse consequences on the environment. The Minister for Lands and Natural Resources hereby directs persons and or companies engaged in reconnaissance and or prospecting in forest reserves with or without legal authorization to suspend such activities until further notice, recommend the grant, including renewal and or extension of reconnaissance and prospecting licenses in forest reserves. So for the avoidance of doubt, except as directed by the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources in writing, all suspended until further notice. That's the directive from the Lands and Natural Resources Minister. And accordingly, he's hereby giving persons or companies engaged in these activities, in the forest reserves in particular, 7 days from the date of the publication of this particular notice to cease their operations and evacuate the equipment accordingly. So that's the directive that's just coming in today. So the minister can write once I get the all clear with my phone lines. And then also we hear from George Mrikuduka. There are questions about how long this ban will be in place, how long is going to take place, because after that 7 days, it kicks in. But how long will it continue to operate? Because per the statement, both legal and illegal prospecting is on hold. But why will the sins of those operating illegally will be visited on those doing legitimate business is one of the concerns that have been raised already. And issues about enforcement is always that issue also. And we see that there's the directive to the Minerals Commission, but what exactly is the plan when it comes to these enforcement? We'll get to that as well. And how many companies in total are expected to be affected by this ban as well is also the key question that comes up. The small consultative meeting that was held, the National Consultative Forum, the president directed that it happens, and the minister made it happen somewhere on the 14th to the 15th. That 2-day National Consultative Forum came off. And my colleague Kwekwa Sante sat through that consultative dialogue, and he joins me in studio. So was this actually part of that communique? But before we get into that particular specific question, let's bring up a recap of really what these stakeholders wanted to happen when it comes to this particular issue.
Right, Emefa. So at this forum, these stakeholders were big on some of the challenges that illegal mining is causing. For them, if government wanted to do some of these things, they could long do. I quite remember this particular issue did not come up in the communique that was issued, but it was big on some of the issues that people who came from mining communities, people who came from farming communities, to ensure that some of these things are destroying their cocoa farms and other things. And so they wanted government to sort of issue a blanket ban on prospecting till it can properly delineate and say these are ones mining legally and these are ones that are not mining legally. And so that when you have this, then you'll be able to take the next step. The minister at the time said this is something they were going to take into consideration. And so I'm not so surprised that it's coming up. But they've been making the point that they were going to place this before cabinet. And we know that cabinet has been sitting not so long ago. And so I'm sure some of these this directive that is coming out is born out of this conversation that has gone on before cabinet.
And the statement rightly quotes paragraph 12 of that communique that says that emphatically they charged government to take steps to put in place systems that will rigidly apply the law, noting particularly the sanctions, penalties imposed by Act 995 to all those who infringe the law, irrespective of political color or socioeconomic status or class. Indeed, the better placed in society and who ought to know better should have the most punitive of the penalties applied to them. So that statement quotes portions of that communique.
Right. So it came up at the meeting that let's promulgate new laws. And these people were saying that we already have enough laws in the system to be able to deal with this. And you know that this statement that has been issued by the minister quotes a specific law that allows him to ban prospecting for the time being. And so what they are saying is we have the laws. And so what you have to do is enforce what we already have so that we can be able to make some headways as we still try to get all stakeholders on board. And so it is for some of them who came up to this consultative forum, hearing this will mean that the people who came to the forum wanted. They do not want just a talk shop, 2 days, come and talk around, and then do not go ahead and do some of the things that you've outlined. And so this is very important coming in today.
But to the extent that the minister can write to individuals or companies to explicitly give them permission to engage in this in spite of the ban is also one of the things that comes up. I don't know if it came up at that forum and what exactly stakeholders, their concerns are about this, giving him such powers to be able to undertake this whilst there's a ban in place.
Right. So this did not come up so directly, but I remember some of them raised issues about this approval process and the powers that the ministers ought to have to be able to deal with some of these things. And the Minerals Commission, for instance, who have the power to be able to approve some of these concessions, go to the grounds and talk to the chiefs and the people before they grant these powers, were sort of in agreement with some of the people that let's raise some of these issues, let's give the minister this power, let him be able to do some of these things so long as it is not in breach of existing rules and regulations. And so they sort of agreed that was not stopping was because there was no strong political will to deal with it. And so just a few days ago, the ministers went to tour some rivers and they saw the color of these power. Of course, in later days, some of them could come back and check it so that this power is not subject to abuse. But for now, if the minister is using it to do the right thing for them, it is always the right thing to do.
Interesting. We've contacted the Small Scale Miners Association. My colleague Latif Idris will join me shortly in studio with that. What exactly their reaction to this latest directive from the Lands and Natural Resources Minister is. We'll tell you more about that. My colleague Erastus Asaridonko earlier, I told you, it came up also during vetting of the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources Minister. But here are excerpts of that documentary.
The team's journey to this part of Manso and its forest saw scenes of destruction. Abandoned pits and mining settlements dot the road leading into the remaining part of the forest. We arrived at this mining settlement deep within the forest enclave. 7 Chinese nationals were quickly located and arrested. Leader of the team conducted a search room by room. There were indications of military presence.
From what we are seeing here, It looks like there are some military men involved in this whole activity in this forest.
In the midst of our search, a young military officer drove into the compound in a Tundra vehicle.
Yes, sir. Obi to say, I will see a lot of people. Obi to say, so just no more.
He started making some calls to his superiors.
I will do the staff sergeant, sir. We are here at this thing, Tonto Chrome. The whole duties, and there are some policemen and media be here.
Within the next 30 minutes, the whole place was crawling with over 30 angry, armed military men. Anger turned into heated verbal exchanges and near fisticuffs.
So you heard the excerpts of that documentary put together by my colleague Erastus Asari Donko. Let's now bring in the Deputy Minister Designate for Lands and Natural Resources, George Mirkuduka. We're grateful for your time here on Top Stories, sir. So we've just seen that directive from the Minister for Lands and Natural Resources. But curious though, in 7 days we are told that it's kicking in. But how long will this ban be in place?
Let me say a good evening to your cherished listeners and yourself. Yes, the minister responsible for land and natural resources has accordingly suspended recognizance and or prospecting activities accordingly. And as you rightly said, it triggers in 7 days. And, the most important aspect, the minister hasn't started in office since he assumed the office, and has been going around and collected lots of information as to or regards to licenses and prospecting licenses or prospecting licenses are rather using them for mining instead of the prospecting. Prospecting is entirely different from mining, but most of these concessionaires acquire these licenses and just mine irrespective of guidelines given by Minerals Commission. So for him, or to allow him to regularize that enclave, giving that directive for concessionaires to comply with. And the time limit would depend on how effective or how early we comply with the rules out there. So if we're able to comply immediately, it wouldn't take even a week, because what he intends to do is to regularize the sector, allow prospecting license to reflect the activities of prospecting and not to use prospecting license to mine.
Okay.
So if these laws or regulations or directives are accordingly, I believe it wouldn't take much time for the ban to be lifted.
So we're hoping that in the shortest possible time you get all these companies to
Absolutely.
regularize. But how many companies exactly are you expecting to come forward to regularize these licenses that we're talking about?
According to the data that is available, we're talking of lots of companies, but I wouldn't want to speculate at this point in time. I would want to give out specific details as to the number of companies. Obviously, you wouldn't also want to give out names of companies without probably sanctions or upright approval.
I'm definitely not asking for names of these companies. I was asking for the numbers in terms of how many we are expecting, because I'm sure that once this ban is going to be in place, you have an idea of how many companies you are hoping to regularize.
We keep adding up, and probably by the close of tomorrow, I can give you the exact number.
Okay, but curious though, how come we are asking both legal and illegal companies or individuals holding prospecting licenses to stop the activities? Is it that we don't have clarity exactly on how they got the licenses, or why are we visiting the sins of those operating illegally on those who are doing legitimate business?
My sister, you realize that if you're even prospecting and not mining, and you are asked to hold for a while, because prospecting is just taking samples to test whether or not you have enough, expected gold, and or depending on that should in any way cost you at this point in time, because it's not like banning mining companies. It is banning or regularizing prospecting licenses.
Okay.
And we have also realized, or the minister has realized, that most of the mining companies or the prospecting or prospective mining companies are also allowing others to mine around. So if obviously you connive with others to mine irresponsibly, when regulations or when something of this nature comes, it obviously affects you. So this will also serve as a deterrent to others going forward.
Okay.
That when you are given a concession to mine on, and someone comes around also to mine irresponsibly, you need to act accordingly by reporting to the appropriate authorities.
But in all this, I'm sorry to cut you, enforcement is always the issue. I see also that there's a directive to the Minerals Commission, but what exactly is the plan when it comes to enforcement?
Yes, the minister had a very fruitful meeting with the IGP today as to how best his outfit would collaborate with his to enforce this directive. So the minister is the lawyer, he's flexible, and teaming up with other, responsible ministries to ensure that this directive is duly enforced. If you recall, he had to visit a riverside with the responsible minister at the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, which yielded a positive result. So he's obviously liaising with all other ministries to ensure that some of these things or rules are adhered to. So it's not a matter of just referencing it at the Ministry of Land and Natural Resources, but obviously collaborating with specific or responsible or other affiliated ministries to ensure that some of these things work perfectly.
Well, we'll follow it up. Thank you very much for your time. That's George Miriku Duka. He's a Deputy Minister Designate of Lands and Natural Resources. Let's bring in the Media Coalition Against Galamsey. Mr. Ken Ashigbe joins us also for his immediate reaction to this directive from the Lands and Natural Resources Minister for all persons and companies prospecting for gold, both legally and illegally, in forest reserves to stop and remove the equipment in the next 7 days. Thank you very much for your time, sir, here on Top Story. So I'm sure this has been brought to your attention so far. What will be your immediate reaction to this directive?
Well, I had it listening to you this evening, and I think that, first let me wish the Minister for Land and Natural Resources a happy birthday and say that this is the best way to celebrate his birthday. We've had him speak and talk since he's been minister, but we've seen him act, and the action is a very responsible people who are prospecting. It is because a lot of those who are prospecting have licenses to prospect are engaged in illegality. One of them is the issues that your colleague Erastus followed. And if you look at the writ that even the Imperial Heritage Imperial filed, they concede that they are mining. And if you also look at we wrote to the EPA asking, doing a search about them. And the EPA were very categorical that the permit allows the company to engage only in exploration activities. That is streaming and soil sampling, pitting and trenching. But if you see a lot of the activities of these prospecting companies, a lot of them are going beyond just prospecting. So it's good that the minister has done this, and would then require everybody to come back and justify if they actually were prospecting or they had gone beyond prospecting. Unfortunately for us, the Minerals and Mining Law as amended has very punitive sanctions. And I've heard the minister talk about the fact that they are going to allow the laws to work. This is a very good way of doing it. And we all need to support the minister in this particular activity, because a lot of the people who are behind these prospecting people are the so-called untouchable. And the minister has demonstrated that he will let the laws of this country work. And I think that all of us, including the media, should really support the minister to ensure that the people who are doing these things and destroying our forests are dealt with. I'll be very interested in what happens to Heritage Imperial, for us to see the work that they've done and to find out whether all they've been Forestry Commission. They have not responded today. We've sent reminders to them. In the same vein, what happened to Erastus with the military high command? We also wrote to the military high command asking questions about what had happened to the team that went there. There has been no responses. The media coalition will definitely be coming up, but we would definitely support the minister, and I think it's a right action that has been taken.
We're grateful for your time. That's Ken Ashibe. He's with the media coalition against Galamsey, or illegal mining, I should say, and he's been reacting to that statement issued by the Lands and Natural Resources Minister, that directive to companies who holding prospecting licenses, both legally and illegally, to halt activities and remove the equipment from our forest reserves. The Mineral Commission has also been directed not to issue or renew such licenses. It's time now for news.